Um, I have a student who always makes me think of Shakespeare, where we have the famous Shakespearean quote where it says, methinks you protest too much. Because he'll say things like, well, I really, really like this, but it doesn't really matter. And I wish we could do that, but if we can't, that's okay. And there's always this sort of like footnote that goes along with what he's doing. And when I was very young in college, I tried to intuit something, and I got chewed out by a professor because he told me to leave intuition up to women, and that I didn't have any. Well, I was pretty young. I was 25 at the time. And I was just trying to encourage him to go do an activity with us, and he didn't want to. And so he got very irritated at me and came back at me with that because he was, at least twice my age or older. And so it put me off of trying to intuit things for a long time. And then I discovered that very often I had a pretty good sense for what was going on. And when this person would say things like, well, we're going to do this and that and everything, but if we can't do it, it doesn't matter. I started to realize that it probably did matter a great deal to them. And as I got to know them better, I realized that they were doing a lot of, I guess you'd call them big things. Things would involve a lot of money and influence. And they were trying to perhaps deal with the fact that it did matter so much to them. And by putting that disclaimer in there constantly. And I think back to an occasion where we knew someone that was a monk, and he was really kind of a jerk. And we had all gotten together, and he'd been very rude to everybody. And so later on we were talking, and I said, he really needs to get his act together. Now, see, I could do this because I was older than him as a monk. I could say he needs to get his act together. And the person I'm talking about said, oh, no, he's doing the best he can. And of course, this is the Zen school. This is not the, we're going to worry about your self-image school. This is the Zen school that says, when you're going around being rude to everybody, maybe somebody needs to say you're going around being rude to everybody, and you might try being a little bit nicer. And so I kind of called this person on it, and I said, really? You really think he's doing the very best he can? Because that's very sad if that's the very best he can, because he was literally rude to everybody. And he said, well, he was horrible to me, and blah, 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 and he vented. And he realized that he had actually spoken what he thought. And then he was, and I didn't mean to trap him, but he looked very trapped in that he had actually spoken what he thought, rather than the way he thought he should speak. Is that making any kind of sense? I'm looking at Eric, who's the man operating the camera here. And I thought about this a lot. Dogen Zenji talked about life being the koan. And that we have our formal in Zen, we have formal koan study where we try to understand why Chao Chu said the puppy dog did not have Buddha nature. And why Hakuin asked his students what was the sound of one hand clapping, and those kind of things. But then we have life. And life, at some point you get done fooling around with the formal koans, and you still have to deal with life, and you have to deal with someone who keeps saying one thing, but doesn't really seem comfortable. Now, when I was a little bit older, but not as old as I am now, I heard the phrase, walking the talk. And which, of course, I think everybody's familiar with, that you talk one way, maybe you talk like a really nice guy. Is that the way you act? Are you acting like a really nice guy? Are you acting like someone who doesn't get upset because somebody says something? And if you're not, then why aren't you? And hopefully in the Zen school, we try to walk the talk. There's a kind of chanting that originally was Theravada. And I have to tell you another little story, then I'll come back to what I'm talking about. But I have to tell you about the first time I went to a Theravadan temple. And there was a dedication for this temple, and it was in West Hollywood. It was a house, and the living room was kept very astir. There was a little statue of the Buddha and a little bell, and that was about it. And we went in there, and I had been informed by my teacher that we were going to do some meditation, and then we would do some chanting to dedicate this temple. And then we'd have a really great meal. So we went in there, and I sat down, ready to do my meditation. And I started to meditate, and all of a sudden, somebody's talking. And this talking goes on for basically 30 minutes. And this is my first exposure to guided meditation. Now, you hear, in America, you hear all the time about Vipassana meditation, because this has become very popular with some Americans. And it's been that kind of meditation has become popular in places like Laos and Cambodia. And they do that meditation there. They've only been doing it for a few decades. In other words, they stopped doing that meditation for a very long time. And they did these guided meditations. May I be peaceful. May I be happy. May I be satisfied with what I have. That kind of guided meditation. And it made me think of the student of mine and his approach. So this is, we tried to do this one time, and it didn't work out too well, and so I said, well, I need to put it on the back burner, and we'll do it again. And this is a meditation that's done at one of the temples I'm familiar with, and it says, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. And that's a typical, it can be used as a meditation, and some people do use it as a meditation, but it's actually more of a prayer. And the Tibetans found out about this, and for those of you watching, now that we're on camera, see, I got self-conscious, Eric. I was doing great. Now I'm self-conscious. My good side, my bad side. So the Tibetans, of course, were the last country that embraced Buddhism. And it had been going on for quite a while when they decided that they were going to, most of the people decided they were going to be Buddhist. And in the process, they pulled in all these different practices and whatnot. And one of the practices they pulled in was reciting a prayer. I call this a prayer. To me, it's really a prayer. And the Tibetans treat it like a prayer, where the Theravadins would treat it more like a meditation, where you'd be sitting in a room quietly, following your breath, and perhaps one monk would recite this, and this was supposed to influence you, which it could. So the second line is, may all be filled with loving kindness, may all be well, may all be peaceful and at ease, may all be happy. And I forgot to do the first one. The first one, it's got music. I know that camera can see this because I looked at what you did last week. It says, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful. May I be at ease. And may I be happy. Oh, and they have it in here, it's on the end. Okay? So, this is a nice little prayer. May you be filled with loving kindness. May all be filled with loving kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. It's a wonderful prayer. The problem is it doesn't work unless you walk That's the problem with this kind of thing. It's the problem with any prayer that is written down. It's that you have to be that prayer, or it doesn't have any impact. I had a very good friend, and we used to do a prayer like this together. And it basically, it went on the same form. This is actually pulled out of a very long poem, if you will, that can be done. And it's missing, to me, the most important part. Because it has, may I be filled with loving kindness. Or let's say, may all be happy. Well, it says, okay, may I be happy. May you be happy. May all be happy. All right, because that's what Buddhism is about. To stop the suffering, to stop the unhappiness. May those who I don't like be happy. That's what's missing from this. And I didn't really know what was bothering me about this until I realized that if I'm talking to you, obviously I get along with you. You must be okay. If I'm praying about you, matter of fact, this implies there's a you involved. Now, when I say, may all be happy, well, people don't have to be in the room, but when I say, may those people who I don't like be happy. Well, wait a minute. Remember the little girl Pollyanna in the Disney movie? That everything, there was always a good side to everything that happens. No matter how bad it seemed, there was a good side. I always think of myself as Pollyanna. I can remember being in a car crash where we got T-boned. I was a passenger, and they hit my side of the car. And my response, once I climbed out of the car because I couldn't open the door, was, I'm alive. And I don't have any broken bones. And this is really good. And the person who was driving the car that I was in was a monk. And he basically had the same response. Oh, aren't we lucky? And a lot of people would not see the luck in the situation, but that's the way we felt about it. But to admit that we have people we don't like, that would admit that we're something less than perfect. And I really like that. I used to do that on a regular basis. I'd say, may those that I don't like be happy. Because I have to be honest with you. This is a nice prayer, but if you live this prayer, you really haven't changed anything. Unless I don't like Eric. If I secretly don't like Eric, yes, he's doing the long face now. If I secretly don't like him, then this would express generosity on my part. And to say, may all people be happy, well, okay, fine. But there's nothing personal about that. It's very Pollyanna. It's very, you can't hold me down to anything. It's very real, but I like the idea of, may people that irritate me be happy. May people that I don't like be happy. And of all the teachings of the Tibetans, I have not retained any of them, because I really don't follow the Tibetan path. But years ago, when the Tibetans first came to America and started teaching, I read something by a Tibetan guru, monk, and I've never forgotten it. He said, our enemies are our best teachers. Don't have any idea who that monk was. And I'm sure that every good Tibetan monk knows that saying, that our enemies are our best teachers. There's very little to learn from people that don't irritate us. There's very little to learn from people that don't like us. Or that like us, I'm sorry, But for people that irritate us and rub us the wrong way, and for people that just simply don't like us, there's a lot to learn. The first thing to learn is not to be irritated at them and not to be unhappy. It's very hard for people when somebody doesn't like them. I found years ago when I was in the workplace that there were, I seemed to get along with everybody pretty good for the most part, but every once in a while there would be a lady that just didn't seem to like me. And I don't mean on any big personal level. I just mean I'd say, "Good morning, how are you?" And everything would come off of that person that they just weren't comfortable around me. They just didn't like me. And finally, this had happened a number of times over the years, and I asked a very close friend, I said, "I don't know what I'm doing wrong. You know, I try to be as friendly as I can." Now, this is a workplace now. There's nothing personal in here. It isn't like I went up to this lady and said, "Oh man, you look really good today. Do you think we could have lunch together? Whoa, maybe we go to a movie tonight." It wasn't anything like that. It was simply, "Well, good morning," with somebody that maybe I only saw in the morning and I wouldn't see him for the rest of the day. And I was informed that there were going to be, because of who I was as a person, as a male, there were going to be some women who just automatically were not comfortable with me, which translated as don't like me. Because one of the things that all human beings have is a burning desire to be liked. We all want to be liked. I've never met anybody that said, "I think I'll go into that party and see how many people I can find that don't like me. And then I'll feel like I'm fulfilled." So that burning desire to be liked, that's what I was experiencing. Because every once in a while I'd run across somebody that just wasn't comfortable with me. I'm big, I'm loud, on certain occasions I smell bad, and that's what was taking place. There was an enormous amount of freedom in realizing that no matter what I did, some people wouldn't like me. And I could leave it alone. I didn't have to try to make them like me. You've seen it. Kids do it all the time. Kids really get their feelings hurt so easily. And then they try to go fix it. And they don't even know what they're fixing. And it may not be fixable. You know, it's just something about you that doesn't work for people. On the same vein, I used to worry about people understanding what I was doing. That's a very difficult thing. Now, I've been a Buddhist a long time, but I really didn't understand that people saw things differently. That everybody in this room sees things slightly differently. That everybody in the world sees things slightly differently. That if I say a word like peace, if I say the word peace, what does peace mean? And that's a pretty straightforward word. Yet to some people it means absence of war, or a war has come to an end. We've been in the longest war, I believe it's the longest war we've ever been in now. The war against terror, as we move from one country to another, fighting the whole terror issue. And if we say we can look forward to peace, because the president has said we're going to bring people home, we're going to do this and that. Of course, with ISIS, who knows what's going on now. But everybody has an image with that, except there's a very different image about the word peace. The word peace can mean that you are at peace, that you are calm, that you're not afraid, that you're comfortable, that you're at ease. It can mean that. Pretty different meaning than I'm worried about somebody dropping a bomb on me. And yet, there's all these little subtleties in here. It's just like colors. There's nothing sillier than two people standing and arguing about a color to paint a wall. It's too blue. No, it's too green. No, it's too blue. No, it's too green. And nobody realizes that eyeballs, you know, I used to do this with people. Introductory course to Buddhism, I'd say, okay, close one eye. Look at the colors. Now, close the other eye and look at the colors. They're not the same, are they? And almost universally, people would go, well, no, there is a difference. And I said, well, if there's a difference between your two eyes, why wouldn't you think there's a difference in perception with different people? Of course there's a difference. Our thing that we have to do is to recognize that there's this difference and that there is no absolute right or wrong. It's just the way it is. There is this difference, and then we can accept that. Everything's wonderful. So I look at this. This is actually a song, and it's kind of neat. It was put in a key nobody can sing in, and I changed it to another key, but it's funny. It starts off, you, all, I, where I think that, of course it has I up underneath that. But I think I like the idea, if we start using it here, that we'll talk about the people we don't like, the people that irritate us. And I really love it when we get down here and we talk about, may our enemies be happy. There's so much power in that statement. The first power is to recognize that we have people that don't like us. That's what an enemy is. An enemy is not somebody you don't like, it's somebody that doesn't like you. But you have to stop and think about that. I know that a few years ago when we started the war on terror, and we started seeing who we were actually fighting, I started praying that those people could be happy. Because there's a lot of things that the Islamic extremists are, but one thing they're not is they're not happy. That's obvious. You don't go out and do the violence they do if you're happy. It's so violent that most people cannot understand why they're so violent. But I say they're not happy. So if we could magically pray for happiness, and they could become happy, they'd probably stop being our enemy. And that would be a powerful thing to accomplish. But we would have to gin up some kind of desire in ourselves that they could really be happy. And that's kind of hard to do when you're fighting a war with somebody. It's the last thing that crosses your mind. I hope this guy that's trying to kill me will be happy. Because it seems like it's a contradiction. And yet it's probably not. So be careful about what you say you want and then tell everybody you don't want it. You know, I'd like to have a big title, but not really. It's not important to me. I'd like to have some fancy clothes, but not really. It's not important to me. The fact that you said it. You know, it's like the joke. You've all heard people make a joke and they go, oh, not really. I didn't really mean that. And I remember reading that a comedian, or heard a comedian who said, within every joke, half of it's true. It's driven by something that's real. So the Buddha, towards the end of his death, was given a golden robe. This has always bothered me. I heard people talking about the Buddha had a robe made out of gold. Can you believe? It's not reasonable. It's not, is it? Not the Buddha, not the guy that got a bunch of rags and sewed them together to make his first Buddhist monk robe. Yes, and in the Nirvana Sutra, in the Parinirvana Sutra, someone came and gave I just read it again this morning, gave the Buddha a golden robe made out of gold thread, and also gave it had to be uncomfortable. Imagine how heavy that would be. And gave the same thing to Ananda. So when you look at the pictures of the Buddha as he's dying, he's got a golden robe on. And that's the golden robe he got given right at the end of his life. Of course, he couldn't buy anything with it, but it's really interesting. We have a tendency to always think of the Buddha as being very rigid, or some people do, the scholars do. They look at it, he wouldn't bend. And yet he was given a golden robe, so he wore it. It was made out of gold, and monks aren't supposed to keep gold or silver. He never complained, because he could wear that golden robe just like you would wear a cotton robe, like I've got on. And it meant nothing to him. But there are people, if you give them a golden robe, they're in big trouble. Aren't there? Yeah, they start taking that robe really, really seriously. And they'll be the first ones to tell you, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm chicken. I'll just stick with cotton robes, and then I don't have to say it doesn't matter.